Hello and welcome to the Intellect's Cove. I'm Colin Fairley. I'm the Sir Edward Peacock Professor of Political Theory at Queen's University in Canada. And in this video, I'm going to unpack a little bit more detail about Chapter 10 of my new book, Aging and the Ethics of Longevity Science. You can access that book from the Oxford University Press website as an open access book for free. So it's linked in the video description. This is the second video on Chapter 10. What about a good death? And I already covered in the previous video that the concern for a good death is another constraint on longevity science. So if you haven't yet watched that first video, I suggest you do that before watching this one. In that video, I detailed how the ideal of disease control in particular jeopardizes the aspirations to realize a good death because it's simply committed to extending survival time. And this exacerbates the gap between healthspan and lifespan, which jeopardizes many of the things that people associate with the realization of a good death. In this video, I'm going to make the case that the aspirations of rate control are much more likely to help us realize a good death. And I'm going to detail the reasons why I believe that's the case. So, like the issue of a good life, I remain agnostic for the purposes of this book so that we don't derail the activity of trying to articulate the ideals of wisdom inquiry longevity science. What constitutes a good death? I believe that the argumentation that I deploy in this chapter is compatible with a plurality of reasonable articulations of what a good death are. I surveyed in the last video the types of things that people identify as being an ingredient in the realization of a good death, and I'm going to amplify some of those points again in this video here. So I asked Gemini to create a depiction of Socrates on the deathbed with Plato and Aristotle and others looking over him. And I want to make the case now in this video how the aspirations of rate control are much more conducive to the realization of a good death. In the last video, I showed that pursuing in a myopic fashion the aspirations of disease control will further jeopardize the realization of a good death because it's exacerbating the gap between healthspan and lifespan. So in particular, in that last video, I just drew attention to three components that are commonly addressed as being elements of a good death for people. They want a quality of life, they want a pain-free status, and they want to preserve some emotional well-being. And these things in particular are jeopardized by the growing disparity between lifespan and healthspan. All right, so I'm going to make the case now that rate control in compressing the period of frailty, disability in late life will help us better realize our aspirations for a good death. And this argument that I made as a critique against Winslow's extension of the war against disease to the chronic conditions of late life was an unintended effect, right? It wasn't the intention to create a disparity between health span and lifespan, but in Winslow's candle analogy, where he presumed that, once you reach the later stage of the human lifespan, you would simply pass away. He did not anticipate that medical science would become very successful at keeping people alive by managing the comorbidities of late life for many, many years. And as I disclosed in a previous video, my own mother underwent chemotherapy treatment for more than 14 years. And we had many, heart-wrenching discussions about the impact on her quality of life and what the end goal of simply trying to delay death into later stages had on her quality of life. And so my interest in this topic is not purely academic, and you could extrapolate for everybody that watches this video. These will be issues that your loved ones will also face in the later stages of the lifespan. And so I make this argument to try to ensure that our children and grandchildren are not living in a world where the gap is even larger than the nearly 10-year gap that it is today. Ideally, they have more opportunities for a healthy longevity and a compression of disability, frailty, and disease in late life. Okay, so the foundational argument in the book is that we should be prioritizing a distinct ideal in medical science, articulated initially by Willard Thompson in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, and then formulated by Alex Comfort as the ideal of rate control. Just to reiterate, Thompson's aspiration for geriatric medicine, that everyone hopes to live to a ripe old age in a state of good health, right? The second component of that statement is the key one for translational gerontology, because the war against disease is simply ensuring that people get to a ripe old age, but they're getting there by extending the duration of managing the comorbidities of late life. And that was the basis of Emmanuel's contention that he would stop taking medical treatment or undergoing medical screening after age 75, because he didn't want to experience an extension of that kind of post health span period of life. Now, Thompson argued that there's two aspirations for geriatric medicine. One is the care of the aging population, and the other was a concentrated attack on the causes of aging. And both of these are relevant to the realization of a good death. The care of the aging population involves, palliative care and geriatric medicine more generally. But I'm going to focus specifically on how the aspiration to slow down the rate of aging, both through non-pharmacological but also pharmacological interventions, can better position us to realize a good death than simply trying to delay mortality into later and later stages of the lifespan. Now, James Fries was a very prominent researcher in medical science who, back in 1980, conjectured that there could be a compression of morbidity. This is known as the compression of morbidity hypothesis. In his article in the New England Journal of Medicine, Aging, Natural Death, and the Compression of Morbidity. Now, of course, the reality we've expanded the period of morbidity. We have not compressed it. But James Fries identified exemplar healthy agers as the model that medical science should pursue. And unfortunately, we did not follow his advice of prioritizing biomedical research on exemplary healthy aging. And that is part of the reason I would conjecture as to why we're now experiencing a growing disparity between health span and lifespan rather than a compression. But I want to unpack a little bit about what Fries argued and supplement that with a little bit more. He contended that delaying the age of onset of chronic disease would also result in a shorter period of time people would survive managing chronic illness, right? So the winning outcome would be increasing the number of years you live in good health and shrinking and compressing the period of frailty, disability, and disease in late life. Those are the two things you would want to achieve for the kind of holy grail of geriatric medicine. And what he suggested is that we turn our attention to exceptional healthy agers that already experience this, right? Without medical science innovating or developing some treatment, there are individuals that live longer, healthier lives and experience a compression or morbidity. And they hold the secret to this realization of the compression and morbidity. Now, Fries in particular studied runners. I want to suggest that the evidence on this is a little bit still uncertain. Runners have been studied, people that run regularly throughout the lifespan reduce their likelihood of particular causes of mortality. But one of the issues that's a challenge, Fries was identifying runners, and there's some conjecture that running has an impact on telomeres. It's still debatable whether or not this is all, an indicator that the hallmarks of aging themselves have been modulated so that, extensive exercise slows down aging, but it definitely has an impact on delaying mortality and increasing health span. And one of the complications on exercise, I'll just note this study on the Copenhagen study, is that it's really an issue of dosage. Physical activity can have a very positive impact on our health prospects, but yet, like a drug, it has to be taken in the right dose because too much of it has adverse side effects. So the Copenhagen City Heart Study is one that's been studied extensively, and many publications have come out of it. I'm just going to draw on some insights from the Mayo Clinic proceedings. They looked at individuals, that how much duration of leisure sports activities people would do in a typical week. And then they looked at how that was associated with their cardiovascular and all-cause mortality. Right. So of the people, there's people that don't exercise very often. There's the kind of fanatics that are out there hours many hours a week. And then there's people in the middle that do, a few hours. And what they found was a kind of a U curve. That is, obviously not exercising puts you at higher risk of cardiovascular and all-cause mortality. But conversely, those that are doing what we call excessive amounts of exercise are actually at comparable risks. So like a drug, it's actually, so exercise is very effective, but you have to make sure that you're not taking too little or too much. And so the sweet spot that I have as the target here were those that were participating between 2.5 and 4.5 hours on a week. They actually had the lowest in mortality, all-cause mortality, and cardiovascular mortality. So it's a fascinating issue, and what Fries was certainly ahead of his time in conjecturing that studying the variation in aging, and in particular how lifestyle impacted the compression of morbidity, was definitely a message that unfortunately medical science did not take as seriously as they should have. And now we are facing the health predicament of a nearly 10-year disparity between health span and lifespan. Now, I want to supplement some of the insights that Fries was discussing. He was looking at runners and exercise, but for me, I think the exemplar examples of healthy aging are supercentenarians and centenarians. And when we look at them, I've listed two articles here. There is ample evidence there's a compression of morbidity in late life. Right. So many people think when they hear about somebody who lived to 107 that they were just kind of hanging on for 3 decades, managing the multimorbidities that they witnessed their grandparents managing when they died in their 80s. But no, these people have an increase in health span and a compression of morbidity in late life. This article, Health Span Approximates Lifespan Among Many Supercentenarians. And then the mechanisms of aging piece, centenarians, an excellent example of resilience for successful aging. What this type of research amplifies is how important the genetics that are underlying exceptional healthy aging are. And so I want to complete my discussion of Fries by supplementing some other fascinating research on those that survive to the upper bounds of human longevity. So this other article that I mentioned here, so take this with a grain of salt. All these issues, there's multiple studies that pull in different directions, a lot of epistemic uncertainty. But I really want to just talk about the importance of genetics versus a lifestyle. I mean, both of these things are important, but usually the opposition that I face in my research and teaching is from those that believe that lifestyle itself is, some kind of silver bullet and much more important than any kind of innate biological resilience to the onset of chronic disease. Now, I believe that's true for the average person, that most of us don't have these genes that are associated with exceptional biological resilience to get us to 100 years disease-free. But when you look at those individuals, they are not complying with ideal lifestyle prescriptions. So I just want to draw on the insights of this article in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society. This looked at 478 individuals, the majority of whom were women, because women survive into these higher age cohorts in greater numbers, that were still living independently at age 95 or older. Right? So these are exceptionally healthy older individuals. Most people are dead before they reach age 95. Now, what's fascinating about this study is that these people, the women and others that survived and were living independently beyond age 95, were not healthier earlier in their life in terms of body mass index, smoking, physical activity, and diet than the general US population. Now, what this suggests is that there can be some innate biological resilience to the stressors that typically will accelerate aging and be responsible for death, in the 7th or 8th decade of life for the average person. But these exceptional and the rare individuals have a biology that provides some enhanced resistance to the onset of these chronic conditions that result in them dying earlier and surviving with these comorbidities, more typical of people by the 8th decade of life. And that provides further evidence that the genetic puzzle, understanding the genetic puzzle, I'm not suggesting we manipulate through genetic engineering people to mimic this, but what I am suggesting is as we gain more information about the epigenetics of aging, we can design drugs that mimic the biological processes that are occurring in these individuals, so that by taking a geroprotective drug, you are activating the genetic mutations associated with this more healthy aging through the 9th decade of life. That, I think, is the real fascinating area of research for translational gerontology moving forward. So there's one final objection in this chapter that I'll mention, and this is the position I refer to as geroconservatism, those that are against especially the experimental arm of translational gerontology. So this particular sentiment argues that the pursuit of aging drug innovation is often framed as a necessary measure to help redress the growing gap between healthspan and lifespan. That's the argument I just made. With the intention of increasing the former. So I'm in favor of boosting the health span and compressing the disparity. But the geroconservative critic might respond, why not simply aspire to level down by making medical assisted dying more readily available so that people struggling to manage quality of life in late life have the option to end life rather than survive with a poor quality of life? Wisdom, inquiry, longevity, science, they maintain, should prioritize the realization of a good death. I think this is actually a really challenging topic to address. I myself, I'm not opposed to medical assisted dying. Canada has brought in MAID over the last few years. But what I am against is this particular sentiment that says the only thing we need to do to address the predicament of aging population is offer medical assisted dying, rather than also trying to increase the health span and compress the disparity between lifespan and health span. Leveling down, in my view, is a morally abhorrent suggestion. It's certainly ageist, and it does not take seriously the right to health that older individuals should have as a result of being a human being. All human beings have an interest in promoting their health. So this geroconservative sentiment, just to articulate the position more, is about it agrees that the disparity is a problem, but it proposes the narrowing of the gap by just offering medical assisted dying so that people are not surviving longer, managing the comorbidities of late life. Now, if there was no prospect of compressing this disparity by increasing health span, that would have a kind of different optics. But those that are too zealous in promoting this as a kind of one size fits all solution, I believe, are ageist and are undermining the right to health that all human beings should have across the human lifespan. So the ideal of rate control pushes back against this overzealous posturing that medical assisted dying is the way to address the disparity. So instead of promoting leveling down, which I think is a morally problematic position, I believe, based on what we know about the science of the biology of aging, that there's a feasible alternative to increase the health span of populations. And so, I mean, medical assisted dying may still be an option in the cards, but it's done in conjunction with a serious effort to increase the human health span and compress the disparity by promoting the ideal of healthy longevity. Simply proposing to level down is not offering, adequate healthcare attention to people in the later stages of life. And in particular, this is a problem for women who survive longer than men managing poorer health in later life. So this leveling down proposal in particular will have a more dramatic impact on women than it will on men who don't survive as long. So my response to this is just to dismiss it as ageist. It's not a helpful suggestion when proposed as a silver bullet to addressing the problems of population aging. I'm not suggesting that it can't be part of a broader discussion about how we address the issues of late life and dying. Dying is inevitable, and I do believe there are definitely circumstances where medical assisted dying can be justified. But I believe a society that proposes that as the solution to the disparity between health span and lifespan, while discarding the importance of investing in biomedical innovation to increase the health span, does not take seriously the moral interests of older persons who should be we should be committed to promoting their health prospects. So all of this suggests, at least I conclude, that wisdom inquiry science, in addition to all the other benefits that I have been articulating over the last 10 chapters for the realization of the ideal of disease of rate control, is that the realization of a good death is also going to be better promoted in a society that pursues the ideals of rate control rather than fixating only on the original public health pioneer aspiration of saving lives by delaying mortality into later and later stages. Unfortunately, that has not made good on the realization of a good death, and it has led to many of the predicaments that we currently face, such as those advocating for medical assisted dying as the solution, or those that propose, capping, as Daniel Callahan did, an age limit on how at what age people can be denied access to medical treatment. The humane and wise response, I believe, is to invoke a distinct ideal, the ideal of healthy longevity offered by the pursuit of the general science hypothesis. All right, so that takes us through that last section of chapter 10. This, I'm making good steam on these videos. I'm now heading in towards the last two chapters of the book. We're going to turn our attention to the issue of climate change and climate science and how translational gerontology may have an impact on planetary health and the ability of older populations to have improved health in a warming future.